Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Zavala, and I'm the Director of Student Success Research here at the Coordinating Board. Thank you to those who were able to join our bridged webinar last week. This time around, we'll actually be able to provide a very detailed explanation of the various error reports that your institution might have received, and also be highlighting important points to pay attention to. I'm going to actually be using RCS data from the initial submissions that we received so as to better illustrate how you would go about interpreting the reports and making the changes to your own files as well. So with that being said, I will now go ahead and do a brief overview of the several resources that you all should have received via email. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. So to start off, you all should have received several files within an email or through Move It. So within the RCS instructions for corrections PDF, you'll find the various files that you would have received via email. So this guide is the end all be all to what you should be using as far as your corrections that need to be made for your data. And so just want to briefly point out that you all should have received your own submission file back from the 2021 submission period. You all would have also received several different reports, error reports for your institution, and along with a reference file that is in an Excel sheet. I'm going to briefly pull up that reference workbook to highlight a couple of various sheets. So the correction page that I was previously showing has a lot of this information right here from the reject file column details page. It goes a little bit into some more details, summarized version of details, if you will, of the various different error reports that you might expect to receive. Again, just want to reiterate that not all of these reports will apply to every institution, but this is essentially a summary of the various reports that you might expect to receive. And we're going to be going into a little bit more detail on these various reports in a few minutes, but I just wanted to highlight that this is a very important page to sort of set the context for the different error reports that you might be receiving, and the column names that are being affected, a brief description of that column and therefore that error, and a sort of example of what you might expect to see in a given error report. The next few sheets, sequence data definitions and group data definitions, will hopefully be familiar to you for those who may have submitted the 2021 data in the past. For those of you who maybe have not seen it, these two sheets are essentially duplicate versions of what previously existed in our template that we used for the 2021 data submission. It goes into a little bit of more detail of the different column names, how we were defining it, what were the appropriate values that you should have used to fill out each column. And the one addition, especially if you've seen this before, that you might notice is column G, this do's and don'ts section. So essentially, we understand that that 2021 submission was the first time ever that we were collecting this information. And so we learned a lot along the way, and through conducting our error checks and validation, we put together a list of sort of do's and don'ts, things to pay attention to and to remember as you're filling out your information. So, one of the things I might highlight first is FICE code. There were a lot of errors that we received on this one due to the format of a cell being such that perhaps the first two leading zeros or perhaps a trailing 0 might not have appeared, and therefore we only receive, let's say, the first 4 digits of a 6 digits FICE code. Same thing happened with SIP. So, just a few things to call attention to. We've got things highlighted in bold here to really call attention to some of the things that we want you all to pay attention to. Again, these are sort of a summarized list of of the most commonly seen errors that came across when we were doing these checks. So these will also be important sheets to come back to as you're filling out as you're correcting your original submission and thinking through, what might possibly be going wrong if you are receiving an error. So that takes care of the sequence data definitions tab, along with the group data definitions tab. We have the sequence data template and the group data template here, just as a sort of reference for the actual columns that were used in the 2021 submission. There was the case that there was a little bit of changes done to either the name of a column or adding or removing some columns, and we ask that you just please make sure that you are using the set lists of columns that are listed here, no more, no less, and no changing of the name either. So that applies for the group data template as well. Again, these are sort of just for your reference. You do not need to actually enter data on any of these sheets. And finally, the last important tab here in this file is the pre-checks. And so this is also similar to what we saw on the data definitions with the do's and don'ts. This is a bit of a summarized version as well. Again, just some important things for you to remember as you're correcting your files, and a lot of the errors that we will be going through within the various error reports. You could easily find those errors listed here in this section. Again, if you're seeing that you're getting errors, a really good place to start would be here in this pre-check sheet to see what might possibly be going wrong. So let's go ahead and go back to our instructions packet. So if we scroll down just a little bit, we will see that we're covering some important information. I know several of you have let us know that this is actually your first time, looking at RCS data. This is going to be your first time doing these corrections. And so for those of you who would like some more information on how these reporting requirements came to be and what exactly you should be reporting on, this overview of RCS reporting requirements will be very crucial for that understanding and context that is needed for this overall submission process. So if we continue to scroll down, so the next section we see is this overview of error reports. And so we have a list of the various error reports that you may see. Again, some of these error reports may not apply to your institution, but we did want to make sure that we provided a comprehensive list of the various error reports that you might possibly receive. And we encourage you to view these reports in this order that is listed here. And so this right here, this list, this table, will be helpful to sort of paint an overall picture of what error reports you might come across, and a very brief description of the potential errors that you might see. Again, this is sort of just a starting place to orient yourself in terms of the error reports. But we do ask that when you approach your corrections for your 2021 submission, that you actually go ahead and get started by scrolling down and starting right here in this section. So the first report that you will see is this RCS load audit report. And so essentially, this report will let you know um, how many rows from your original Excel file were accepted, were rejected, and that sort of thing. So it really just gives you an overall sense of the extent to which you might need to correct errors. And so you actually don't need to do any kind of correction or any kind of edit for this report. Again, this report is just giving you an overall sense of your submission. So let's go ahead and see what this might actually look like in real life. So this is an example of a load audit that um, that was sent out to an institution. And so what we want to pay attention to here are several things. So this row one, it will be the case that for all of the error reports, this is sort of the header columns that exist. And they signal to you where exactly in your submission you need to be looking for the various rows and potential errors that there might be. So the first thing we want to do is go to row 2 here, since that is the first row with actual data inside. And so we see that for this particular institutional file, within the group data template, we see that the groups information, that there were some rejected files there. We see, if we go to this Excel row count, we see that the original submission had 226 files within it. Once we filtered out any rows that may have been empty, then we see what the change in rows may have been. In this case, there were not any empty rows, so we see that the Excel row count of 226 is the same as the original submission that came in. And now the last column that we see here is the data load count. And so this column is important because it lets us know, how many errors we might expect to correct in our file. So what we can see here is that of the 226 rows of data, 224 were able to be successfully uploaded into the database. Same interpretation goes for row 3. We're talking about the same file here. We're instead looking at the sequence data. We see that the original submission had 500 rows. After accounting for empty rows, we see that that number dropped to 477. And of that 477, 432 rows were able to be loaded into our database. So again, this is just giving you an overall sense of what we were and were not able to upload into the database. So moving on to the next error report, we have the RCS reject. And so for this particular report, what you're going to want to do is look at this table that we've provided here. And essentially, I will pull it up in a second, but essentially this table illustrates what types of error codes you would likely see, or you would see in your error report. And so each code illustrates a different description of an error that we found in here. And so you will, if your error report has a B in it or several Bs in it, you know that there is an issue with the formatting, the length, or the junk values. So this is a really good sort of data dictionary to further understand what types of error reports you might be seeing. So we've got error codes B, E, M, and I. And so let's go ahead and pull up an actual submission that had this RCS reject report. So this is an error report that an institution would have received. And so again, row one acts as the header. Two is the start of actual data. So what we can see here is that um, in this file right here, and if we go into the sequence data AGSL sheet name, we're going to row 5, we can see that the columns of category, group number, and SCH from are coming up as having errors. The particular error code that we're seeing is 3 eyes. So let's go back to the table that we were just looking at, and we can see that I means invalid. And so there's something going on where um, potentially this institution submitted both data in the sequence portion columns as well as the group sequence portion columns. So let's go to the actual file to see what may have happened. Okay, so we said row 5 is where we saw the issue. And so if we go to row 5 in the original submission for this institution, we can see that there is data in column K, which is the SCH column. And we also see data filled in for columns O through Q right here. So the reason why there is an error being flagged here is because we have some validation rules set in place that if you provide information in columns O through Q, the group category, group number, and the number SCH from group for semester, within the sequence data sheet, then that means you should not have any data filled in for columns H through K. And so in this case, we see that there is in fact data in column K. And so in order to get rid of this error, you will need to remove the 3 from here. Same kind of guidance goes for if you have, let's take row 4, for example. We see that columns H through K are filled in with information. That means that we should not be seeing any information displayed in columns O through Q. So like I said, with row 5, if we were to take that, that first error that was flagged in the report, we would need to remove the 3 from column K, and there should be no problem with this submission being accepted and approved. So then let's go to the next error report, which is this group reject file. And so this report is very similar to the one that we just saw. Only difference is that rather than looking at the sequence data sheet, we are going to be looking at the group data template sheet. And so we see similar error codes, right? So I won't go into detail about that, but why don't we go ahead and pull up a example of from an institution. Okay. So we see here that for this institution, we'll look at row 2. For this institution, we're looking at the group's information. We are looking at the fact that there is an M here. So that means some missing information. And so let's go and look at this particular institution's file and see what we can find. Okay, so we are on the group sheet. Let me go back to the file here. So we are looking at this file right here. We are looking at agriculture in a major group, so we'll go to 93 and find the error. Okay, so I've pulled up this institution's original submission, and there is an error being flagged here, that there is some missing information, right? So some important things to highlight here that would be very helpful in interpreting this sort of error being flagged. So the first is that if you have a group category by the name of MG, IG, or EG, then you will need to list out um, all of the various courses that could potentially make up this requirement. So, for example, we see here that this institution left a note in the group notes column that any agriculture course would be able to satisfy the requirement of this major group 10. So in order to correct this error, we would delete this any AGRI course from column L. So column L would be empty. We would then need to add in all of the courses that a student could potentially take to satisfy this requirement. So let's just say that this institute, a student at this institution could take 5 different courses, all agriculture, to satisfy this requirement for agriculture. So they would need to, so an institution would need to go back to this file and type in all of the various courses that they would need, that a student could choose from to satisfy this requirement. So the other, important information that will be here as well is, you'd want to make sure that, these columns are filled out with group category, the MG, this column right here filled out with 010. All of them are called agriculture. You have your FICE copied over, and then you also have the course name for each of these different courses. And can't forget to put the SCH in as well. And so again, for this kind of error that you might see, you're getting an error because, like I said, if you're using a major group, an elective group, or an institutional group as your group category, you must list out all of the potential courses that a student could take to satisfy a given requirement. So let's move on to the next report. Okay, so our next report, error report, that you may have received is called the RCS template reject. And so this kind of error that is being flagged is more so due with some kind of error with a particular sheet. There might be no data within a sheet, or there might be just a bunch of text in a sheet that really isn't necessary and that you don't need to include in your final submission. So let's go ahead and look at an example of an institution that received the template reject report. So this institution, we can see there were about 55 rows of errors that were flagged in here. But really, the reason why we're seeing 55 is because this institution submitted several files within their submission that were separated by SIP. So likely this issue that we're going to cover in row 2 will likely be found in all of the other files. And so, it'll be important to just keep in mind what this original error is and make sure that all of your other files are similarly dealt with. So what do we see here? So if we're looking at this file right here and we go into the group data template sheet, there is the error that's being flagged is template. And so we can see that there's either something going on with the template or there's some kind of empty sheet there. So let's go ahead and pull up this particular file and see what might be going on. So actually, let me go back. Okay, so we actually see that in this particular file, there are two errors that are being flagged for this particular file. So we see something related to um, the row that begins with that has headers for the FICE code and beyond that are empty, and then this row that says the degree plan was found. And additional text there. So we know that there are two errors that are being flagged within the file. So let's pull that file back up and see why it's being flagged. So we can see here that there are three sheets within this institution's file. So the first sheet is called Institutional Sources of CS. And so that text that I had been reading, lo and behold, we can see it here at the very top of the sheet. And so how you might fix this error when you're making your corrections is we do not need to see this institutional sources of CS sheet within this file. You can remove this, delete this sheet. So this one, we would not see it in your final corrected file. So sequence data template, we didn't see that being flagged for anything. I'm looking at it now, and there doesn't seem to be any anything related to template. We see that there's no missing information either, so that's good. And the other sheet that exists here is the group data template sheet, and we see that there's actually, when we scroll across and up and down, we see that there is actually no data within this sheet. So this is a sheet that can be removed. So those two errors that were being flagged were because this group data template sheet did not have any information and therefore can be deleted from this file. And the institutional sources of CS, has a bunch of screenshots and text that aren't actually necessary for this particular file or even submission in the first place. So so that errors would not be flagged, then this institution would only have this sequence data template as the only sheet within this particular file. So our next report is the RCS data correction sheet. And so with the original Excel template, there were some errors flagged in terms of really looking at the FICE code, the SIP code, and some the term name column. And so, like I said, the original Excel file instruction sheet that we looked over with the do's and don'ts, that's going to be something that is going to be important for you to look at because it says what the appropriate values are for each of these three columns. And so I can say, some of the most commonly reported issues were that, when you, let's say, wanted to copy over your FICE or your SIP and you dragged down those columns, it actually would increase your FICE or your SIP by 1. And so there would be errors in that sense. The formatting of some of these values would be, might be custom or might be general, such that, the numbers weren't registering as text, and therefore zeros were often left off unintentionally, by most people. And so those were some of the errors that I just wanted to call attention to, and we can see that here if we go to this data correction. error report that we can see. So for this particular institution, if we were to look at their sequence data template sheet, and if we scroll down all the way, we can see um, these last three columns, and these are the columns that I want to pay particular attention to. So after expanding all these three columns, so we can see that the correction indicator says 1. So that means that a correction was made on this particular row within this file. The corrected column was the major SIP column, and the notes here says that, in order to successfully upload all of the data, you would need to change your original submission, which had the SIP of 90101, so that would be 5 digits for SIP, and instead change that to 090101, which is the accepted 6 digits for the SIP. And so what likely happened in this sense was what I mentioned earlier, that a lot of times 1 or 2 leading zeros were might be typed into a particular cell, but then the format of that cell would change and would actually remove some of those zeros that we actually should have seen within the original submission. So, a lot of this, what you can see for this particular institution in this file is actually, some relatively easy fixes of just going back to these particular uh, program SIPs that were identified and just making sure that the format for that is a text, and making sure that all 6 digits are registering correctly as they should be within your file. So we can see, let me go back here. So we can see that, within the file, you would want to make sure that that we see 6 digits in the FICE and 6 digits in the SIP. It just so happened that on our end, in order to ingest the data, we did in fact change the original submission to reflect those 6 digits for both these columns. But in your submission, in everyone's submission, you will have to go back and make sure for your own that you are in fact using the 6 digits. And the beauty of this error report that we were looking at before is that we are flagging those particular ones that you need to change on your original submission. So that's an important point that I wanted to raise. So moving on, we have these 2 error reports that involve group data correction. And so you'll see here that there is one file with this ending of 0515. And so it says that what's potentially going wrong in this kind of report is that there might be some typos or some blank cells that would be affecting some particular field. So, in this case, we're flagging the FICE code as an example. So let's pull up this group data correction 0515 to see what this might look like. So for this one, we see, if we take a look at this particular file, so we're honing in on row 2, we look at this particular institution's file, and we go to the group data template, and we look at, we see this core information. It's an IG group. This core information here, and we scroll all the way over, we can see again, similar to the last 3 columns that we were paying attention to in the previous file, we can see that those three same columns exist in this file. So this correction indicator of 1 indicates that a correction had been made on our part, but will need to still be made on the part of the institution. And so in this case, what we can see here is if we scroll all the way down, we can see that there are about 100 errors that were flagged, and they all had to do with FICE. And what happened here is that we're making a note that the FICE needs to be updated to this 6-digit SIP from this previous SIP that was that had been included in the original submission. So the great thing about this column is that it's telling you you need to update the FICE to the correct one, and then it shows you what the one from the submission that had been used incorrectly. And so by looking at this error report, we can actually see that this was an issue of simply copying over the FICE and actually dragging it down, thinking that it would copy over as it should be, but instead each of the rows were actually would actually increase by 1. So, if this happened to you, rest assured this is a very, very easy fix. So, even though there are about 100 rows listed here, this can be corrected in no time. So, that's sort of another thing that I want to call out here is that, please do not get overwhelmed with potentially seeing a lot of rows within these error reports, because what we've actually found is that a lot of the errors might have been repetitive. And so once you understand how to fix one, it's very easy to make those same corrections across other potential errors within this particular report, or even across multiple files. So please do not panic if you potentially see a lot of rows being listed within your error reports. Okay, so let's move on to the group data correction 0519. This one is going to be a little bit tricky in terms of our previous reports really did a great job of letting you know the exact row number, where errors were found, and what you needed to do to correct them. This particular error report does demonstrate that it makes you aware that there are duplicates or inconsistent courses within your original file. But when you look at the row that is being impacted, the correction that you need to make isn't just isolated to that one row. It more so tells you the general sense of the error that is happening. And so I'll go into this a little bit. I'll pull up an example right now, but the things that you'll find here in this particular report, it calls out flags for these columns called duplicate group row, same group, different course list, and same group category number, different group name. And so that's how you would interpret the names of these columns. If you see a 0, that means there was no error found, and a 1 does indicate an error. So let's pull up an example of this particular report so that we can take the time to look at what the impact might be. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to point out here is that if we look at this particular file for this institution, we go and look at the group data sheet, we can see that a lot of these courses, or these group names, I'm sorry, that are being listed here, the only difference here is that the number at the very end is increasing by 1, right? And then we can see that Yes, in fact, they're all using the IG group listing, and they are all also using this group number of 1. And so um, I'm pointing these things out for a reason. So if we scroll over to these 3 columns that I mentioned from before, we can see that for the first, I think it's 27 rows, we can see that there's a 1, meaning it's flagging an error in this same group category number, different group name column. So how might you interpret this? Okay, so if we go, we see that the 1 is for the first 27 columns. So we can see here that this applies to this batch of group names, group categories here, right? So this is being flagged as an error because the validation behind this step is expecting to see that all of these courses from row 2 to 27 have the same exact name, group name. And so to correct this error here, we would need to make sure that essentially all these numbers at the very end are removed so that this IG1 group only has a group name of life or physical science. Um, the other thing that I want to call attention to as well is this same group, different course list column. So let's say hypothetically this submission had had another IG1 and it had different course listings, and let's say it had a bunch of creative arts core um, uh, group names within it. So this would have been flagged as another error because another issue that we saw across institutions was using using the same group category and group number, but having a different set of courses listed within each one, right? So in this example, in the example that I was explaining, if we had this IG1 and it stayed the same with life or physical sciences, but then this institution happened to have another IG1 and that one had a bunch of other different courses, that didn't match this first one with life or physical science, then, in order to correct that, you would have to go in and either change the group category and group number for the life or physical sciences core or for those creative arts core for that particular group. So in that sense, you would likely have seen, oh, there's a 1 here maybe for the duplicate group row, right? Because now you have 2 groups that are both called IG1. Then you would also have a 1 here because you now have 2 groups that are both being called IG1, but there's a different set of courses within each list. And so the main takeaway here is that you want to make sure that if you're using a group, a specific group category and a specific group number, that the group name looks the same across any of the courses that utilize that same distinction. The other takeaway being that you want to make sure that the group category and group number are unique, and that you don't have multiple combinations of category and number, because you will also be getting errors flagged in this way. Let's see. So then if we were to go to that particular example, we would see, okay, well, as I said earlier, if we go to rows 2 through 27, we see that, the institution would just need to take out these numbers on the end so that it does not continue to be flagged as an error. Everything else, everything else would be okay. One thing that I do want to point out as well in this particular example is that this SCH column, we can see here that for these rows, there's actually a um, a 2-3. So, there are a bunch of courses here that could satisfy either the SCH, either 2 SCH or 3 SCH. And so our guidance for courses that might have varied SCH is that you go with the lowest possible SCH for that particular group. And so, if the courses you list out could vary in terms of semester credit hours from 1 to 4, we would ask that, that you would put, the lowest number here. The thing that I also would like to address is that for this particular example, the SCH that should be listed here should match the SCH that is essentially listed in this sense. So if I'm seeing this correctly, then all of the courses that seemingly have 3 SCH should have a 3 written in these. I believe this last one right here might be a 2 semester credit hour course. So in that case, there should be a 2 right here. So the SCH that you have listed here should match directly to this particular courses that that you're listing out. Okay, so we have just 2 more reports left. So the next report is the invalid SCH report. And so for this particular report, we looked at the program inventory that we have here at the agency that has the list of approved programs that institutions can teach, and we also have the SCH as reported by each institution. And so for this error report, what you'll see is a list of your programs, and you'll have a column that has a total RCS SCH, which is essentially when you sum the SCH that you reported for your sequence data, sum the SCH you reported for your group data, you get a total SCH, and you see that number, and you see it being compared to what we are pulling in from the program inventory. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So what we see here is for this particular institution, I mentioned this total SCH column, and then this columns I and J are being pulled directly from the program inventory. We've had some questions that we've gotten from the field that I also want to take the time to address here. So it's not an issue that if you see a 0 in the max SCH, this is simply because both columns are not necessarily filled out within the program inventory. So please don't interpret this as some kind of error on your part that you need to fix or anything like that. So how you would approach this particular report is you would look at, let's say you look at your first SIP. So we see that for some reason, there are 2 rows being displayed coming from the sequence data template and the program name being environmental studies from this particular institution's file. So what is the explanation here for that? So what we discovered is that if we're to start with row 2, we can see that the SIP, the SIP that had been provided on the RCS report was actually reported in this format. with the zeros and technically at the 8-digit level. And so we know then that row 2 was the original file that was submitted by the institution. So if we're looking at this, we can see, okay, this one, this award level was a bachelor's degree. The sequence that had been reported was a total of 120, and hey, that actually matches up, quite nicely to the program inventory here. You might ask, well, what do I do with this second version that exists, and what even is this version? So this version is actually if we were to have corrected the SIP, this is what we would have seen. Now, we discovered along the way a mistake on our part in that the SCH that's being reported here is actually a sum um, of the SCH that had been reported in the original submission, along with some other rejected SCH within this particular program. And so we're asking that, if you do see some additional rows, that this is likely the issue that's happening. So overall guidance here in interpreting this report is, at the end of the day, we really just want to make sure that you're double checking, your programs, double checking the RCS totals, and comparing how that relates to the program inventory. So even though we have an error report like this that is flagging invalid SCH, please know that when you submit your corrected file, you any kind of error that's flagged, where let's say you've got a duplicate row here, or maybe the RCS that you're reporting is not matching up to what we have listed on the program inventory. None of those things will prevent you from actually submitting your data. Rather, this flag is going to act very similarly to what you might see in the CBM, where it's just sort of a warning flag letting you know, hey, what you're submitting seems to not align with, something else that might be being used as a validation tool in the background. So again, we just want to encourage everyone to really double check the total SCH columns, and seeing if maybe there are some corrections that need to be made about the numbers that you're using. I've had conversations with the field about numbers looking very high in relation to the program inventory. And so if you do have examples like that, please do not hesitate to contact me. We can look through it and see what might be going on. I think one institution had mentioned that they had included all of their concentrations in their program, and I let them know that they actually don't need to do that. So when we talk about these recommended course sequences for programs, if a particular, let's say, program or SIP has a number of concentrations, we're simply asking everyone to pick the concentration that has that is the most popular, has the most enrollment, within a particular SIP. So again, we absolutely welcome those conversations, and if something just looks off, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So going into this particular institution's file, I think I explained earlier how you would go about getting that total RCS SCH column would be adding up all of the numbers and values that appear in column K with all of those that appear in column Q, and that would give you your total RCS column. The other thing, going back to this report, that I wanted to call out is something that may apply to several of your institutions. So if we scroll down here to rows 132 and 133, we can actually see that that program inventory columns, they appear empty. And so the reason for this is because although an RCS was given for this particular SIP 521301, and the name of that program is called Management Science, the reason why these are being displayed with empty cells is because on our end in the program inventory, we do not have any record of this program existing at the institution. And so a couple of things to consider for this is one, we're going to be sending out some additional information about where you might look at your program inventory to see a list of the SIP codes that we have on our end that your institution is approved to offer. It may very well be that um, perhaps you incorrectly put the wrong SIP in that particular column, and therefore that with that change the error sort of goes away. If you find that nope, in fact, like you are using the correct SIP, to the best of your knowledge, and it's just not showing up in the program inventory. Right now, we don't have a way of doing any kind of additional validation on it. And so we're asking that that you would leave off any programs for this correction cycle that are showing up with empty cells in the program inventory min and max columns. And that's something that we will in the future work with institutions on to see how we can incorporate these additional programs that may not currently be picked up by the program inventory. And the last error report that that an institution may have also received is actually it can't be found here on this instructions PDF, but I did want to address it because it was unintentionally left off. And so we have had some questions about, well, what about this RCS and then LG large group GT 50 courses greater than 50 courses? So large group greater than 50 courses is how you would interpret this file. And so this is, I'm pulling up an example from a particular institution, and this, for this error report, so things to sort of call attention to. So this error report is showing us that within the group data template for this particular institution's file, we can see this group name being used. It's called component area option chart 2. It's given the category distinction of LG90. And so we can see if we scroll all the way down to the very end of it being used. So we can see here row 114. Okay, so this institution listed out the 114 or 115 courses that satisfy this LG90 requirement. But it's being flagged as an error because our guidance with large groups is that one, you should only be using a large group if you have more than 50 courses that satisfy a given course requirement. If you have less than 50, then you should not be using a large group, and you should instead be using either the IG, MG, or EG category distinction. In this case, we see that actually, this institution is using the LG group category distinction correctly because there are more than 50 courses. But the reason why it's being flagged as an error in this case is because our guidance with using the large group was that you actually should not be listing out all of the courses that would satisfy the requirement. So in order to correct this error, this institution would need to get rid of all of the different course variations here. So all of rows 3 to, I believe it was 114, would disappear. They'd be deleted. And instead here, all of this information would be filled out through group number, but then the course prefix and the course number would not be filled in. And then in the group notes column, you would want to make sure that there is a URL being used in this column that would actually be able to direct students to some kind of web page where they could see, an expanded version of the courses that exist. Because, we acknowledge that it absolutely took a lot of time, for this institution to spell out the exact courses that could make up this group. But when we're talking about the tool that students will be using as a sort of interface to look at recommended course sequences, the tool itself will not be able to support, more than 50 courses being listed out. And so, we just ask that if you are using the LG distinction, that you are also including a hyperlink in there. So, for this institution, like I said, to correct the errors being displayed here, and before submitting this again, this institution would want to make sure that they only have one line for this LG90, and that they also include a URL with a website where a student could go and click and see, what various courses might satisfy this particular LG90 requirement. So with that being said, this sort of concludes this initial phase 1 task of these error reports that you all may have received, how you would go about interpreting these reports, how you go about fixing some of these errors. Again, not all of the reports are meant to be fixed, but they're more so a guide as to the extent of errors in your original submission. So with that being said, I do want to call attention to the fact that we are going to be using a new a template that will have some validation rules and guides sort of built into the original template. It's not going to be very different from the template that we've used before, and as you go along making corrections and addressing errors, there shouldn't be any concern about copying over that information into the new template. But please be expecting that pretty soon here. One thing that I also want to flag is that I know initially we readily accepted institutions submitting multiple files, with multiple sheets within them. But again, something we learned along the way is that best case for us to use in terms of ingesting all of this information is that we're asking each of you to just submit one file, and within that file you will have two sheets, one for the sequence data and one from the group data. And so if you are in fact an institution who submitted multiple files, perhaps across various departments or across various SIPs, when you submit your corrected files, you will have to, consolidate your other data so that you're making sure that you're only submitting one file to us with two sheets within that. And again, our deadline for these corrections is August 25th. If there's any concerns about your ability to complete these corrections in this time, please do not hesitate to let us know. We're here to help you and help you, interpret these error reports, let you know what exactly needs to be fixed. A lot of the errors that I went through today may seem like a lot, but a lot of them are not as time consuming. They can be easily fixed, and so we definitely are here to help you identify what those easy fixes might be, and we absolutely understand that some of these corrections may need to take a little bit more time. But if that's the case, like I said, please let us know, and we intend to work with all of our institutions to make sure that we're able to provide corrected data that will be fed into our Map My Path tool. So with that being said, we are continuing to have office hours. Our office hours are actually listed at the very top of the page here. Um, Thank you to those institutions who have already submitted up until this point. Very much value all the feedback that we've received so far, and some of the questions that have been raised both in the webinar previously and then within office hours as well, have actually been noted throughout this webinar. Just wanting to call attention to some of those commonly reported questions. We will be emailing out a list of answers to the questions that were also raised within the webinar, so please be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much for all of your patience with us, and really working in collaboration with all of you all to get this corrected data and really get some good baseline data into our database, because it will only make everyone's life easier as we continue to make updates and changes to our recommended course sequence information. Thanks again.